I remember the first edition of Cruising World magazine that I ever read. It was full of stories and descriptions of people who had somehow figured out how to live and travel all over the world on sailboats. I was completely fascinated by the concept, but it seemed to me like the only way someone could live this lifestyle was if they had a ton of money and no job. And so my fascination quickly turned to envy. I couldn't get the idea of sailing the world out of my head. Now, this was before sailing on YouTube was really a thing, so I read more books and magazines on the topic, and I discovered that there were some people who were making it happen without a lot of money, who worked while they sailed, and who had fixed up super old and cheap boats. And so my envy began to shift into a kind of hope. So 10 years ago, when my then girlfriend Desiree and I stepped foot aboard a 50-year-old dilapidated sailboat, we weren't exactly sure what to expect. But what ended up happening was beyond our wildest dreams.
Oh my gosh!
It's better than I thought it would be, you know?
Hola, casa.
So I'm Jordan.
And I'm Desiree, and this is little Isabella.
Say hi. Yeah, that's you. And then this is Oso. What's up, buddy? So we've been working, living, and traveling on sailboats in different parts of the world for 10 years now. And we recently arrived here at D-Marin Turgutreis in Turkey after a really great season exploring the Mediterranean.
We've attempted to document our entire journey from the very beginning through our weekly videos, but those weekly videos don't do a great job of telling our story from a big picture perspective.
So this is gonna be the very first episode of what we're calling our recap series, where we're going to tell our entire story from the very beginning over the course of 4 videos.
So we really hope you enjoy it, and thanks for watching.
So our journey began with a 5-hour drive down to Key West, Florida to take a look at a 50-year-old boat that was for sale down there. And it was in extremely rough shape. The outside, as we approached, looked terrible. Paint was peeling, corrosion all over the place. The non-skid was in terrible shape. And the interior looked terrible, like rotting wood, varnish peeling away, mold on the cushions, all that kind of stuff. And I was completely blind to that fact. I didn't see the fact that there was no running water, that there was no water tank, that there was no stove, basically 0 living amenities, and that the boat was not even close to ready to sail. All I saw when I looked at that boat was the Bahamas or Panama. I saw all the most cliche romantic lagoons that you could imagine. You know, I saw freedom. As long as you like it.
I like it.
You like it?
I like it.
So for better or worse, we paid $5,000 and bought that boat.
We're gonna not worry too much about it, and we're just gonna be really happy today.
Moved aboard that night, and we were euphoric. Like, we were so excited, and we were completely oblivious to the epic and long struggle that lay before us, one that would just about completely destroy our dream.
This is our V-berth. It's a little cramped, but I can sit up all the way. And Desiree loves confined spaces.
Now, when we first hauled out Atticus 1 to start the refit, I had told Desiree that the refit would only take 2 or maybe 3 months, because she didn't necessarily want to get into this whole thing to do boat work. I sold this adventure as an adventure, right, as traveling and seeing the world. But when I told her that the whole thing would take 2 to 3 months, I had absolutely no clue what I was talking about. I was 26 years old. I was not particularly handy. I don't think I had ever changed the oil in my own car, let alone refit a sailboat. In fact, I remember very vividly after the first week in the boatyard, kind of realizing just how little we had accomplished over the course of 7 days, and I had a mental breakdown. It started to dawn on me just how much work and just how much time this gigantic project was going to take. And I freaked out a little bit. But we put our heads down and just decided to keep going. And one project at a time, we started hacking away at the refit, learning, making mistakes, and reading a lot of books on how to refit sailboats. That is until we ran out of money.
It just makes me think how much money we put into this boat, what kind of boat we could have gotten for $30,000 that was ready to go.
Now, Now, living in the boatyard, we had become friends with another young guy who was refitting and living on a sailboat in the boatyard, and his name was Noah. And he was a captain aboard a local day charter catamaran there in Key West, and he was able to get us both jobs on that boat.
Time to go pick up some tourists.
So Desiree and I worked together as captain and crew, doing dolphin watch trips during the day and then sunset booze cruises in the evening. And it was great. It was the perfect job for us at the time. You know, it got us on boats, got us a little bit more experience doing that sort of thing. It was flexible so we could continue to do the refit, and it paid well enough so that we could afford to continue to do the refit.
We finally saved up enough cash to buy our standing rigging. This is it right here, $2,500.
So as the weeks turned into months, we were always on one boat or another, whether it be out trying to find dolphins with tourists, repairing the catamaran that we worked on, or refitting our own boat. And we began to get pretty good at a lot of these skills like fiberglassing and sewing. And in fact, Desiree started a fairly successful canvas business.
This is the Captain's Lounge. We're at Stock Island Village Marina. And this is one of our favorite places to come to hang out when we have a day off. And it's also been a haven for me and my sewing projects.
Now, we lived in the boatyard for a year and a half before moving to a marina, which is a really long time to live in such a smelly, noisy, dirty place. And during that time, we were super concerned about whether we were actually going to ever finish the refit.
And the number one question I am looking forward to never having to answer again is, oh, when are you guys getting out of here? I thought you'd be out of here by now.
And that really got to us because honestly, deep down, we had no clue that it was going to work at all. We had no clue if we ever would finish the refit. We had no clue if once we finished the refit, if the boat would just keep breaking on us, or if we wouldn't be able to afford to keep cruising. Like, we worked every single day for years, and we had absolutely no idea whether it was all going to be worth it in the end. But amazingly, after 3 years in Key West, we did finish that refit.
All right, raising the sail for the first time. We're doing 3 knots. Oh, buddy.
Even though I thought it would take 3 months, took 3 years, I mean, what's the difference? But it's funny to look back at the footage of us when we first got to Key West. To me, it is so cringeworthy.
You can see there's a crack in the fiberglass on the bulkhead. We're gonna have to, I guess, cut that out and fiberglass in a new piece. And I've never read about that.
We were naive, overconfident, and we just had no clue just how much work it takes to turn a dream into reality. I guess ultimately there was just an arrogance or a hubris about us that was slowly beat out of us over the course of those 3 years that we spent in Key West, with those sweaty, hot summers, fiberglass dust everywhere, all of that work.
I think I'm just becoming a lot more of a realist than I was in the past.
But then I look at the footage from 3 years later when we were preparing the boat to leave the United States, and I actually see someone who I respect a little bit.
Okay, bud, leaving the U.S. After 3 years of work on this boat and leading up to this moment, how do you feel?
I think I'm emotional because I just started crying when you said that. But yeah, I'm excited, and I don't know, I just got really sad. So, not sad, I guess I'm proud of us.
So going back through all of this old footage brought back a lot of really great memories, but it also reminded me just how frustrated I got during the refit. I remember I was always down on myself for not being as good at the new skills that I was learning as I wanted to be. And honestly, I still do that to this day. I feel like I can't visualize where I am on that journey from being a beginner at something to being an expert. And rather, all I see is that I'm down here and I want to be up there, and I just get frustrated that I'm not where I want to be. So my New Year's resolution is to change how I perceive my imperfections and mistakes so that I can recognize where I am on that journey from being a beginner to becoming good at something and just focusing on getting better at that skill one step at a time. And I think that when it comes to goals and New Year's resolutions like this, I think speaking to a therapist can be very helpful in that they can give you a completely new perspective on your issues and on your problems. Which brings me to the sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. BetterHelp makes starting therapy much easier and less intimidating for a lot of people. BetterHelp lets you have therapy sessions over phone calls, video chat, or even over messaging. Whatever's the most comfortable version of therapy for you. BetterHelp can match you with one of over 30,000 therapists in their network based on your needs, preferences, and location, which gives you access to a much wider range of expertise than may otherwise be available in your city. To get started, you fill out a questionnaire about the challenges that you're going through, as well as the kind of therapist that you'd like. And then BetterHelp can match you with a therapist, which in most cases takes less than 48 hours. And then you can schedule therapy sessions at a time that's convenient for you. And if you feel like your therapist isn't a great fit, you can switch your therapist at the click of a button in your settings at no additional cost. So join over 4 million people who have used BetterHelp to start living a healthier, happier life. Click the link in the description below or visit betterhelp.com/Atticus to help support this channel and get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp so that you can get connected with a therapist and see if it helps you. Now, by the time that we actually got the boat completely ready for extended cruising, we had spent a lot more money than I thought we were going to. Our original plan had been to make it to Guatemala before hurricane season, where I had heard that you could pretty easily get work doing fiberglass and sewing jobs. But by the time that we were actually ready to cast the lines, we only had $2,000 left in the bank, and there were only 3 months until hurricane season. So as bad of an idea as it may have been, we decided to just go for it and to sail to the Caribbean and to do our best to get to Guatemala before hurricane season. And we really had no idea if we would actually be able to make enough money to support ourselves and to continue to sail seasonally. And that fact really did scare us. Like, we were really concerned that this whole idea, this whole plan just wouldn't work out. But we did realize that there was only one way to find out. For the rest of my life, I will never forget the feeling of pointing our bow south, the Florida Keys behind us, the Gulf Stream in front of us, and Havana, Cuba set as our destination. I was completely overwhelmed with emotion. I had never been so excited and yet so anxious about anything in my entire life. That night, as we crossed the traffic lanes, we had no AIS, so all we had was a hand-bearing compass, and we used that to dodge one giant cargo ship after the next. The trade winds were blowing pretty strong, and they were going against the Gulf Stream, so we had some pretty steep and pretty choppy waves to deal with, and we just bounced along all night until the next morning as the sun was rising. We saw the skyline of Havana kind of slowly come into view.
Oh, Havana's right there. Oh man.
And there is no other feeling quite like watching a new country slowly rise up from beneath the horizon. And that concept that the language and culture and people of the place that you see in front of you is fundamentally different from the place where you had left really affected me a lot more than I thought. Like, just that idea was blowing my mind. And really, I was getting my first taste of the epic adventure that is long distance sailing. And after years of preparation and hard work, the experience was just life-changing.
And then our one goal is to find a delicious mojito.
Now, I had wanted to propose to Desiree for a long time at that point, and she was vehement that she did not want me to propose until we had successfully finished the refit and left Key West. I think that she didn't want me to get too comfortable. Like, she was okay living in a boatyard and working on boats day in and day out, but she wanted to keep a fire lit under my ass. And since we had been talking about marriage at length for so long, I figured the only way to surprise Desiree would be to propose the day that we got to Cuba. So with the ring burning a hole in my pocket, we hailed a cab, which amazingly was a classic American car, which I thought was so cool, and we made our way into the city. Now, before we had left the States, I had researched the best spot to watch the sunset, but it took us a lot longer to explore the city than I had thought. So by the end of the day, I was pulling on Desiree's hand, running through those streets, jumping on a ferry, and then sprinting up the last hill, and we just barely made it to that spot before sunset.
Oh my gosh! Buddy! Oh, buddy!
Now, when we did finally say goodbye to Marina Hemingway to sail off into the more remote parts of Cuba, we were once again in a state of very extreme emotions. Watching the Cuban coast drift by as we sailed downwind with the trades was an exhilarating experience.
Guess where we're not?
In the boatyard?
We're on the boatyard. Never thought we'd be able to come.
Just cruising the Cuban coastline.
The idea that all of that hard work was actually going to pay off after years of not knowing if that was going to be the case or not was just amazing. Like, we felt joy like we had never felt before in our lives. But along with that joy came extreme anxiety. I guess what I had never really appreciated before was that cruising is a very specialized skill set. And while I was getting pretty darn good at refitting boats and working on boats, as well as day sailing boats, I was completely ignorant to like how to choose a good anchorage, where to anchor, how to anchor. I didn't know how to read the weather very well. I didn't know how to deal with local boats and traffic. I was far too casual when I really should have been concerned, and I was way too anxious about things that just simply weren't a big deal.
We ran aground for the first time, which was actually kind of beautiful because the water was so clear and there were little starfish everywhere and you could see the seagrass.
So in short, I just had no idea what I was doing. So that month that we spent cruising the north coast of Cuba, I remember as kind of a mishmash of emotions, of joy and then depression, of excitement and then anxiety, right? Like, it was either really, really awesome or it really, really sucked. And it would go back and forth multiple times a day. And although that made it kind of a hard time for us, I also think that no matter where we go, no matter what amazing places we see in our sailing career, I don't think that we're ever going to get that level of excitement back. And so I look at that first month of cruising very fondly, even though it was a really tough time. So after exploring the north coast of Cuba for about a month, it was time for us to continue on our way to Guatemala, and our next stop would be Isla Mujeres, Mexico. So we set off on what was our second ever overnight sail, and we did it in kind of a rush because there was a cold front on its way, bringing thunderstorms and some pretty strong wind, and it would probably pass over us just after we arrived in Mexico, which is exactly what happened. We arrived late in the afternoon, the cold front hit that night, and the anchor held well all night and into the morning. Now, at that time, I had thought that legally I had to try to check into the country even if the weather wasn't good. Now, that is not true. You definitely do not need to leave your boat if the weather sucks, but I was mistaken and I thought I had to do it. And since the anchor had held well all night, I figured that we would be fine, so that morning we hopped in the dinghy and went for a very wet and very bumpy ride into town. We then spent several hours at the port captain's office trying to check into the country.
Got my binder with all of my stuff. Talking to myself at the port captain's office.
And at one point, the port captain literally fell asleep while doing our paperwork. But after waiting there for several hours, someone at the office told us that they had heard on the radio that there was some trouble out in the anchorage and that we should probably go check on our boat. And by the time we finally made it back out to the anchorage, this is what we found. Atticus's anchor had completely lost its grip on the bottom, and the boat had dragged all the way into a nearby marina. The boat was hard aground in sand, and so it was heeled over a lot, and the marina staff had done an amazing job of tying a whole bunch of lines from the boat to nearby docks so that the boat wouldn't get pushed up any further onto the shore. I was completely mortified by the situation. I thought for sure this would mean the end of our adventure, and I was so embarrassed as we kedged Atticus off of the beach and back out into open water. Now, to my surprise, there really wasn't a whole lot of damage done to Atticus, but even more amazing was the fact that there was no damage done to the boats in the marina. To me, that's a total miracle, which ironically, the name of that marina is El Milagro, which means miracle in Spanish. So I think that's very fitting. And in fact, we still owe a huge debt to the workers at that marina because they're the ones that basically made sure that not much damage occurred, even though it easily could have gone the other way. Now, as I've mentioned, we had very little money at the time, and the damage that was done to Atticus was that the push pit or the stern rail had been bent pretty severely. And so I went to speak with a welder to get a quote on what the repair might cost. And I was surprised to find out that the welder, whose name was John, was an American cruiser. So he and his wife Eon sailed and cruised full-time on their trawler, their powerboat, and he worked as they cruised. So he would make ends meet by doing welding jobs and other boat jobs as they traveled. And in discussing our situation with John, it came up that we too were hoping to work while we sailed and that we were starting to run very, very low on cash. Now, I feel like of all the situations and experiences that we've had while sailing, the one moment that had the biggest effect on our lives was when John offered me a job to help him rebuild a rudder for a fellow cruiser. I mean, it felt like divine intervention that here at our lowest point, when we needed help the most, that this situation would arise that would completely solve our problems.
Beer time. Cheers, team.
So John and I worked for the next couple weeks building this rudder, and the project went great. And so when it was finished, John offered me a job on another project. And when that was done, we worked together on another project. And in the meantime, John helped us sort out a deal with the local marina where we got a free slip in exchange for doing odd jobs for the marina. And he and his wife Eon helped Desiree get up and running doing freelance sewing and canvas work. And we ended up working in Isla Mujeres for over a year, as well as doing several improvements to Atticus 1, including building our hard dodger from scratch.
My favorite part of working all day with Desiree is the part where we get to choose what weapons we'll use to murder each other with.
And we became extremely good friends with John and Eon, without whom our adventure could have turned very, very different. And in a truly incredible turn of events, we ended up becoming really close friends with the owner of the marina that we dragged into on that very first day in Isla Mujeres. And so when he offered to let us get married at his marina, we were really excited to say yes, but it was also just this hard to believe turn of events for us. That experience of getting married at that marina, at sharing such a joyous experience with our friends and our family, right at the location where I experienced one of the lowest points in my life, really taught me a lot about whether or not you can judge something that happens to you in your life as being truly good or truly bad. I mean, I think that a lot of the time something that we think is terrible, that couldn't get any worse, is actually the first step towards something that is going to be one of the best experiences of our lives, right? I think that happens a lot. And I think that just seeing life as a roller coaster like that is probably a lot more healthy than seeing things as bad or as good. Now, it was a year and a half after that first day when we dragged into the marina that we had finally saved up enough money to continue our adventure.
You know, we've seen so many boats come and go since we've been here, and we've just been working so hard to make enough money to continue cruising again. And that's kind of how we felt when we were in Key West. You know, a lot of people go there to experience a beautiful place and they drop the anchor and then move on. And it's hard to not get envious when you see people coming through, and Isla or Key West just being a small stop on their adventure. But now we get to join the ranks of other travelers and make one stop after another, just like everyone else.
If Key West is where we grew up, Isla Mujeres is where we learned what it takes to really follow your dream. I think that we learned that desperation, more than anything else, is the mother of creativity. And that when you're truly willing to do whatever it takes to follow your dream, and if you're humble enough to accept any option, any solution, any possibility, if you can get into a place like that, doors will open for you. and there will be a way for you to get to the place where you want to get. It's just that those doors are often not what we think they're going to be. It's not what we expect. So as we sailed away from Isla Mujeres for the tropical islands of Belize, we were sailing away from a very important chapter of our journey. But the next chapter of sailing and exploring the Caribbean was just beginning. So make sure you check out next week's episode, where our Caribbean sailing adventures take us into pirate-infested waters, to beautiful tropical islands, and deep into the jungle to hide from a global pandemic. And how once again, a problem would arise that appeared to have no solution, but a door would open that we least expected.
Can't believe this is our new home.
Oh.